In today's video, we're going to be making a sleeve for your mason jar. Here's what your pattern pieces should look like after you've cut them out and taped them together. However, yours shouldn't be handwritten. For this project, you're going to need an outer fabric, inner fabric, and some batting. I have polyester here, but think about doing some insulated batting. Do make sure that you're ironing your cotton fabric. I promise that this helps so much. And then go ahead and lay out your fabric, put your pattern piece over top of it, and cut your fabric out. I am cutting my outer fabric and inner fabric at the same time. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, then just go ahead and cut them separately. Finish cutting out the two pieces for the sleeve part, then go ahead and do the bottom part as well. If you don't feel comfortable using your rotary for the circular part, then you can also use a heat erasable pen and just kind of mark it out and then use the scissors to cut it out. Obviously do whatever you're comfortable with. That's just a helpful tip. Next, get out your batting. Like I said earlier, I'm using a polyester batting, but I've heard people do insulated batting to kind of regulate the temperature of your drink, so it's not a bad idea as well. Whichever batting you do choose, I do recommend making it just a little bit bigger than the fabric that you've cut out. And now that we have our batting, inner fabric, and outer fabric cut out in the sleeve pattern, as well as our batting, our inner fabric, and our outer fabric for the bottom pattern piece, we are officially ready to go. So as you see here, I will use my hair marker to create a diagonal line that I will sew over, and then I'll usually use my guide bar to continue sewing in straight lines. This pattern is a little tricky, so you might want to consider using the hair marker to continue making lines all throughout the sleeve. This is because on one side of the pattern that you're sewing, the hair marker won't be over anything, so it's not really that helpful. And if you're curious what I do, for the sleeve, I space out my lines by 2 inches, and for the bottom piece, 1 inch. So go ahead, take your batting and put your outer fabric on top of it and pin it into place. And then do the same for the bottom circular piece. And then we'll begin quilting our outer fabric to our batting. You're going to see that I create like a quilted diamond pattern, but really you can do whatever you'd like to do. If you've watched my videos before and you've seen my recommendation of the guide bar, you're about to see here why I kind of don't recommend it for this project exactly. It's not really going over anything, and you're gonna have to guess towards the end of the diagonal line. I did it just fine, it ended up working out, but if you're a beginner, you might want to consider marking out all of your lines with the hair marker. And it also works just fine when you switch it to the other side, but I just wanted to give you all of the information and you can make a decision on how you want to do it. It does work perfectly well with the bottom part of the pattern. I just recommend moving that guide bar into about an inch gap between the lines. When you're finished quilting your pieces, just go ahead and start cutting off the excess batting that's hanging off of the sides of the fabric. This will be for both pieces, the sleeve and the bottom part. All right, now for the good stuff. So we're gonna take our outer fabric and fold it over itself so that the raw edges are on top of each other. You're gonna be looking at your batting. You shouldn't be able to see the outer pretty side of the fabric. Secure this with clips, and then right where I'm pointing is where you're going to be sewing. While we're here, do the same thing with your inner lining. Flip it over itself and secure it into place. For the inner lining, we are going to be leaving a gap right where I'm showing you. So just make a mental note for that for later. And then grab your pieces because we're about to start sewing. So again, we're just sewing close to the outer edges of the outer fabric. Make sure you're doing about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Also remember to backstitch at the start and the end of every time you sew. Then move on to your inner lining. Remember for this, we're going to start backstitch, go down about 1.5 inches, backstitch, leave about a 1.5 inch gap, and then from that begin sewing again. Again, make sure you backstitch the beginning and the end just to really secure those stitches. I am using a white thread on a very light fabric, so I hope you can tell what's going on here, but here's what yours should be looking like. Now back to the outer fabric sleeve. Here we will be lining up the edges of the bottom circular outer fabric to the edge of the sleeve and pinning this together as best as we can. I do also try to lay the edges of my seams flat if you can. As you can see, the right sides of the fabric are facing each other, so you should just be looking at the batting at this point. Just keep adding clips until you've made it all the way around the circle. Again, while we're here, let's do the same thing for our inner fabric pieces. Continue lining up the edges of both the bottom fabric piece and the sleeve piece for the inner fabric. And when you're finished, if you guessed it, we are going to be sewing around the edges of these. This will be the trickiest part of the project. It's just kind of harder sewing circles, but I just want to remind you that first of all, validation, it is harder. Secondly, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just try your best. I will say sewing the inner fabric is a little bit harder than sewing the outer fabric together, but Trust me, when you're pulling this out to put your iced coffee or your matcha in, you will not be thinking about the bottom of it. So the same thing is going to happen for your inner fabric. Just sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and make sure you're back stitching at the start and the finish. All right, when you're finished, take your outer fabric and turn that right side out. But for the inner fabric, we're going to make sure that that stays inside out. So you're going to be able to see all of your ugly seams. Then you'll place your outer fabric inside your inner fabric. I was trying to show you there a couple seconds ago to try to line up the seams of both, but go ahead and wiggle that bad boy in there, and then you're going to align the edges of both the outer fabric and the inner fabric and pin those into place. I do try to keep my seams flat as well. Once this is clipped, you can start sewing at the top edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I think the easiest way to do this is to sew over the batting and have the inner fabric facing the bottom. When you're done sewing all the way around, go ahead and find that hole that you left in the inner fabric and pull your outer fabric through. Glance everything over, make sure everything looks as it should, and if it does, then go ahead and sew up the gap that you left in your inner fabric. Make sure those raw edges are facing inwards, and then go ahead and pin it into place. And where I'm pointing, you're going to sew a line to close that up. All right, for this time, you want to try to sew as close to the edge as you can without obviously going over it. After that's sewed up, push all of your inner fabric inside of the sleeve. And then next, we'll try to evenly line up the two fabrics so that one isn't over or above the other. So kind of pinch the ends and then place a clip over it. And lastly, we're going to sew our top stitch. I recommend starting this where your seam is. We're back to 1/4 inch seam allowance. You're just going to sew all the way around, and when you get back to your seam, you're all done with this. And now you can place your 16-ounce wide mouth mason jar inside of the sleeve. And congrats on finishing another project. I hope it was fun.